Hey, welcome back to Love After Divorce, the place for women who want to find the man or woman of their dreams after a divorce or breakup. So, this is part two of True Confessions, the tale of two doors. In part one, we talked about the ending of my first marriage, the different guys I dated, and the rise and fall of my second marriage. In this episode, we're going to pick up after my second divorce and talk about a new job, more dates, a shock from Randy's former fiance, and my eventual happily ever after. Okay. So, about 8 months after Randy and I split, I got a job working full time in country radio again. Then, about 11 months after Randy and I split, I started to think that maybe I would dip my toe into dating again. So, I went back on Match.com. I think it was the third or fourth time that I'd restarted my membership. I knew dating would be a process. So I started slowly. And as per usual, I met some nice men who just weren't what I was looking for. Then it turned into 2016. I had a few dates here and there. One of them was with a guy we'll call Joe. And guess what? He was also a professor. He was super smart and witty, and I could not wait to meet him. So we met at a local restaurant for our first date. And during the conversation, he joked about cheating on his first wife with her best friend. And he thought he was pretty funny and clever about the whole thing. No. And then I dated a state trooper. Surprise, not a professor. And he was nice enough. He was fun, but he really liked to work overtime. So we'd see each other on a Saturday night, but then I wouldn't hear from him again until a few hours before he wanted to see me again a week later. So we dated for a little while. Then I told him I wanted a guy who was super interested in me and made plans with me ahead of time. And that leads me to Phil. It seems I went from somebody who would rather work overtime to somebody who was just dying to be with me. So I met Phil on Match. He wrote to me from a town a few hours away. We had great email chats and nice phone conversations. And after a few weeks of that, we made a date for him to come to my town for the weekend. So he booked a hotel and place for dinner. The date was fine, but it was another time when I, was really excited about the date ahead of time. But then when I finally met him, I wasn't as excited. So he seemed nice. And even though I wasn't all that attracted to Phil, I wanted to see what happened the next day. And he was perfectly pleasant. He was a few years older than me. He seemed smart, had a great education, interesting job. So we hung out with some of my friends the next day, and I tried to get excited about him, but we've all been there. I just wasn't. So he went back to his city, and we talked a few more times. And he even sent a beautiful bouquet of flowers a few days later. But I knew I had to tell him I wasn't feeling it, so I did. He tried to talk me into dating him some more, but I was honest and just told him I didn't think we were a fit. So there I was, back at looking at the dating profiles on Match. And I was feeling particularly frustrated by the prospects on Match until one day, whoa, the angel sang. Another great contender for my affection was right there on the screen. He was my age, had kids, was physically fit, was good looking. And you guessed it, he was a professor. Like I said, I like him smart. So let's call him Pete. So I wrote to him and he wrote back, and we settled on a place to go for our first date. And I have to admit that I was pretty nervous. And then Pete walked in and we sat down and started talking. He was kind of awkward, kind of nerdy, but that's okay. As I've heard many times, there are good guys that are just bad at dating. So unless I get some signal that a guy has qualities that are total deal breakers, like cheating on his wife, I go on a second date. So we dated for a few months. He often called me a unicorn, a woman who was so special they're hard to find. And he was pretty easy to get along with. He had some odd quirks, like every date we had took place outside. I longed to just sit on the couch and snuggle and watch a movie. Then one time we went to a fair with one of my adult kids, and he gave me the silent treatment the whole time we were there. It was odd because we had done plenty of things with his kids. Every time I asked him a question, I got a one-word answer. As I said, we were at a fair to see a concert. And if I said, hey, want something to eat? He went, no. Want to get a drink? No. Do you care where we sit for the show? No. Want to go backstage and meet the singer? Whatever. So the concert started, and my daughter and I had some friends had a hoot of a time. But there was Pete, scowl on his face, arms crossed. As you can imagine, the ride fun was super fun. Anyway, the next day we talked on the phone. He apologized for being so moody, but then whined. I didn't know your daughter was going to be there. It was odd. As I said, I was around his kids a lot, and he didn't see my kids often. So I'm not sure why he didn't try to get to know my daughter the way I got to know his 4 kids. Anyway, he was very moody, and he seemed very angry with life in general. So that was that. It was goodbye to Pete. So some more time passed, and I was on a few dating sites, Match.com, Bumble, OkCupid, and Plenty of Fish, although really it's plenty of shit. I was feeling desperate. It seemed like there were no good men out there, but I was convinced that I was a catch. So I was also convinced that there were men out there who would also be considered a catch. So I stayed on the dating sites, and one day I logged into Match, and as per usual, some men sent me winks. If you don't know what that is, it's where a man sends a wink with the click of a button. It takes about as much forethought as sending a thumbs up to somebody you're texting. And one of those winks was from some guy with a screen name I can't remember. And asked my girlfriends, I swore I would never respond to a wink. I figured if somebody had any interest in me at all, if he had any sense whatsoever, he'd read my bio and write a few lines in an email to show some interest. Because really, I wrote back to every single guy that wrote to me. I figured no guy worth a crap would just send a wink emoji. That's worse than a guy that just sends a message that says, hi. But like I said, I was desperate. So I looked at the bio of Mr. Wink, and it was good. The pics were pretty crappy, but he seemed to be a decent person. And guess what? Yep, professor. And it's so funny. Until I started writing this, I didn't realize how many professors I've dated. So like I said, Mr. Wink's bio is appealing. So I wrote him a short note related to what he said in his bio, and he wrote back. We set a date to meet at a local restaurant. And by that point, I wasn't excited or not excited. By that point in my dating life, I learned that what we think before a date and what we find on the date are 2 different things. In the past, I'd read a bio and then create an entire persona of this person that I'd never met. And then, of course, I'd be disappointed with the date. So I did my best to not read too much into anything I read online. So I met this guy, let's call him James, at a local place for dinner. And the dinner lasted 5 hours. Needless to say, it went well. And sidebar, I also peed myself on this date. And that's a whole separate story right there. Let's just say that I was enthralled with the conversation. Let's just say I was convinced he'd stare at my ass if I got up and walked to the bathroom, and I felt self-conscious. And let's just say that after a beer, a water, and a Pepsi, my poor bladder just gave out when I finally decided to stand up and go to the bathroom 5 hours later. Anyway, the whole thing became a hilarious story. But like I said, that would be a story for another time. So James and I started dating. I met him 3 weeks after his divorce was final, and things went really well. I thought it could really be the start of something great. But after that initial infatuation and all that, things hit the fan big time. I had PTSD from my second divorce. And of course, James had brought stuff that he had, into the relationship. So I was mentally dealing with things that happened to me in the past while dealing with stuff from his past. And let me tell you, the first 3 years were rough. We had a lot to work out. I didn't fully trust men, and I did not fully trust myself. For example, one day I was getting ready for work, and James said, "You look really cute in yoga pants." And remember, I worked in radio, so like nobody saw me, so it didn't really matter what I wore. So most women, if their partner said, "You look great in those yoga pants," they would have thought it was sweet, but not my brain. My brain went into a tailspin. I had a 40-minute commute to work, and I cried the entire way. Here's why. When he said that, this is what my brain told me. It told me with certainty that his comment was just a clue into the real James. He was a professor at a big university full of hot co-eds walking around in their tight little yoga pants with their tight little asses. And at that time, I was 52. And my brain told me that even when I was 20, my ass didn't look that great. And now at 52, forget it. I imagined that between classes, he just stood in the hallway like a lech and he checked out all the hot co-eds. I was convinced that he was just telling me in his own way that he was just another perv, another cheater. I felt sick and unsafe. I was very convinced that he was a bad guy. And it sounds funny now, but trust me, there are still times when my brain goes there. I still notice myself noticing other pretty women and feeling threatened. It's much better than it used to be, but I still get triggered now and then. Sometimes my brain still tries to convince me that all men are lying assholes who are also very weak and can't say no. And to make things worse, during that first year we were dating, I had a little bomb dropped on me, a shocking surprise. I was on the air one day and I got a Facebook message from a woman. I didn't know this woman, but I did know that she was my second husband, Randy's ex-fiance. You remember the one he called a psycho? So this woman, who shall remain unnamed, sent me a message. It said, I think we were sleeping with the same man at the same time. And I responded, no, I didn't start to date Randy until they had broken their engagement and after she'd moved out. But then she told me that they were sleeping together for the first 6 months of our relationship. You know, back when he was professing his undying love, back when he was pressuring me to get engaged. And it's not like I just took her word for it. I believed her because she had lots of info that she would not have had otherwise, unless they were still in contact and spending time alone. Apparently, he would tell me he was headed to the airport for an out of the country work trip. But what he failed to mention is that he'd be stopping by her house before the airport for a quick bangity bang. And it turns out that he sent her flowers while we were on our honeymoon. Anyway, I still remember the day she contacted me. I kept it together long enough to finish my on-air shift, but I fell apart over the next few days. I was dumbfounded. And if you're wondering why she contacted me, it's because she felt guilty and wanted to apologize. And it sounds like Randy also lied to her, or she didn't even know that he'd gotten married. Anyway, about a day after I'd found out, I was so enraged. I drove out to Randy's house with a dozen eggs. I wanted to egg his precious fucking car, but he was out of town. So I just thought, well, I'll just egg his house. So I sat in my car and sobbed. And I didn't do it at first because I knew that I'd probably get caught doing it like on camera and end up in jail. And oh, wouldn't Randy be thrilled if he knew that I was so upset? So I drove away. I got a few blocks away, turned around and went back, but I still couldn't do it. So I drove back to my townhouse and put the eggs out on the back porch. I let it be a reminder that I didn't succumb to my rage. And not long after I set them outside, some type of vermin ate the eggs. So good for them. Probably some possums, I'm guessing. Anyway, that little fiasco also set my brain back a bit regarding my relationship with James. Let's just say I had a lot to work out regarding my PTSD. I had a lot of work to do to trust myself and to trust men. So fast forward a bit, James told me that he'd marry me whenever I was ready. He knew I wasn't ready. In fact, when I first met him, I told him I would never remarry. Well, about 2.5 years into the relationship, I decided I was ready. So we got hitched by a local mayor. My middle daughter was the witness, and we celebrated by having breakfast at a local place that's famous for pancakes. But for me, getting married was rough. We had to get a marriage license. And I had so much mental drama around that. I noticed I wasn't excited about the idea of going to get the marriage license. And I thought, well, something's wrong there. And it's because my brain came up with a horrible story that went like this. I imagined going to the licensing office and filling out the paperwork. And I'd have to check the box that said I'd been divorced not once, but twice. And I imagined a middle-aged woman behind the counter. I imagined she'd see my paperwork and I imagined she'd be thinking, oh, okay, let's get married for the third time. Good luck with that, lady. And when I imagined what would happen at the license office, I just felt so much shame. So, since I'm a coach, I let myself process that shame and it worked. By the time I got to that office, I felt excited. And of course, the story my brain tried to convince me was true did not happen. There was no judgmental middle aged woman behind the counter. Instead, it was a 20-something guy, and he had Elton John albums hanging above his desk. And so we had a great chat about the movie Rocket Man. So, like I said, we got married by a mayor, and then post COVID, we had an official church blessing and reception. We have 5 kids between us. I have 3 and he has 2. They range in age from almost 30 to 15. And for the first few years of our marriage, James's mom lived with us too. She's since moved to an apartment for folks with dementia, but we see her because she just lives down the street. But here's the real story. I went from having lots of dating no-goes to a debacle of a second marriage to a real life happily ever after. We often joke that it took James 3 weeks on Match to find me, and it took me 11 years and a second divorce to find him. So unfair. We're 5 years into our relationship now, and we often say how grateful we are that we stuck it out through the rough patches. I look at my second marriage and divorce as just part of my journey to James. And yes, that's his real name. So I'd like to tell you what my happily ever after looks like now. It looks like a partner who treats me very well. He's a great listener. Okay, well, sometimes I have to tell him to quit looking at the TV or phone, but overall, I always feel heard. He may not always agree with me, but that's just because he's mistaken. No, I'm kidding. I just never feel that he discounts what I say. And when we disagreed about certain things in the beginning, things that were deal breakers for me, he always stepped up to the plate. I knew I would not stay if he didn't trust me, or if he tried to change the way I express myself. I knew I would not stay if he didn't answer any question that I asked him. There had to be no subject that was off limits. I knew I would never stay with a man who was addicted to anything. Okay, well, we're both totally addicted to sugar, but besides that, no addictions that alter personalities. I would never stay with a man who I didn't feel intimately connected. I was looking for my best friend, and luckily I found him. So let me tell you why I love him so much. First, the way he talks to me. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I am truly loved by him. He always tells me how important I am to him, and he vocally lists the things he appreciates about me. He calls me remarkable. I don't always feel that way about myself, but it's nice to know that he really believes in me. He is the most supportive person I've ever met. I quit my job in radio to coach full time, and he's been cheering me on the whole way. He never complained about the lack of money I made in the beginning. And there are lots of stories I could tell about what my happily ever after looks like, but I'll just tell you a few. This past summer, we visited my family, and before the trip, I decided that I wanted to bring back some stuff that was at my mom's house. So we live out east. My mom's in the Midwest. So James, 3 of our kids, and I flew out to my mom's. But at the end of the trip, I flew home with the kids, and he drove home 15 hours across the country in a very uncomfortable U-Haul. No complaints from him. He just loaded it up and drove. And recently, one of my daughters decided that she didn't want to continue living where she was. So I remember going to James to tell him that we were going to move her back here to live with us. And he didn't flinch. He cleared a very busy schedule without much notice. Then the 2 of us flew one way to Denver. And when we got there, nothing was packed. So 30 boxes later, there he was taking a million trips down a long hallway into a small elevator and down a long path outside leading to yet another U-Haul. And then it was a 3-day trip driving back home. He drove the U-Haul, and my daughter, her 2 cats, and I drove her car. But you know what? He was great. The trip was great. We stopped along the way to see friends and relatives in Kansas City. We stopped to have lunch near St. Louis with my mom, some sisters, and a few nephews. We stayed one night in Indiana with some of James's great friends, and then we made it home late that 3rd day of driving, and he was driving faster than we were. So by the time my daughter and I arrived, the U-Haul had been completely unloaded, and my first husband and my son were there to help too. And remember, I said I was going to tell you something interesting about my husband, James, as it relates to my ex-boyfriend, Steve, the one that my second husband, Randy, was obsessed with? Well, here's the story. When I first met James, we talked about our past relationships and all that jazz. He knew I was still on good terms with many of my ex-boyfriends, even though I rarely saw them or communicated with them. It was the kind of thing where if I bumped into many of these ex-boyfriends, there would be no drama. We'd have a quick hug and a chat, and that would be that. So one day I was on Facebook, and Steve, the ex-boyfriend, posted a video of himself brandishing a sword. And I remembered, I was like, oh yeah, Steve did a weekly sword and staff training. So my husband, James, was sitting right next to me. So I showed him the video. His response, wow, that's so cool. I wonder if Steve would let me train with him. So I texted Steve and he's like, of course. So now James and Steve practice sword fighting every weekend, along with a few other men and women. And prior to that, I had not seen Steve for a few years. And just for fun, he invited James and I over for dinner. And it was great. No drama. It's just so funny. Life has come full circle. My husband gleefully hangs out with my ex-boyfriend, Steve, whereas my ex-husband, Randy, felt nothing but obsession and insecurity regarding Steve. I got what I wanted, a secure man who believes me when I tell him that he's the only one for me. And in another full circle moment, do you remember the story from part one, the pediatrician who ghosted me and for whom for years I blamed my heart attack? We'll dig this. The house where Dr. Mike used to live is just a few blocks from where I live right now. While driving to Dr. Mike's house all those years ago, I passed this street that I live on all the time. And all those years ago, I never would have believed you if you said, one day you'll be living in a fancy house on that street with your third husband. I would have shit myself because at the time I was in the middle of my first divorce. What? Third husband? What? Moving? But yes, this is how things have worked out for me. I'm with a great guy and I live in a beautiful house with one of my kids, and his kids are here 3 nights a week. And in general, life is pretty fantastic. But here's why I named this podcast True Confessions, The Tale of Two Doors. Remember at the beginning of part one, I started by telling you that I'd been at an Al-Anon meeting at a local church behind door 324. And then when I got home that night, my second husband left me. Well, a few years ago, after I started dating James, I remember sitting in church, that church, at Episcopal Church, and it was so odd. I was sitting there with James and remembering how 2 years prior, I had been in that very church at an Al-Anon meeting. And again, I thought about, if you would have told me back then that in a few years I'd be there for Mass with the man who would become my third husband, again, I would have said, you were insane. But here's the door part. Just recently, I started an in-person group for women that's called Love After Divorce. I help women figure out what skills they need to get to their own happily ever after, their own do-over. And guess what? It's at that same church in room 325. When I walked into the room the church had set aside for me, I almost shit myself. It's literally right next to 324. So in 2014, I was in room 324 at an Al-Anon meeting that preceded the demise of my second marriage, a PTSD diagnosis, loads of mind-numbing pain, devastation, and loss. And then in 2021, there I was in room 325, leading a group of women in a group called Love After Divorce. I did not see that coming. And I'm so grateful for all of it. And let me end this story with another funny story. Right now, James has an old Chevy Blazer and car parts taking up all the space in the garage. So both of us park in the driveway. Once again, I'm back to scraping ice and snow off my car. But now I don't curse, I laugh. And then I give James a hard time about the Blazer, of course. So that's my story of love lost and then found, my do-over. My journey took 11 years. And if I would have had help to avoid obstacles, things would have been so much different, much easier, and faster. And if you'd like help with your do-over, just head to therebuildingcoach.com and schedule a chat with me. We can talk about what's going on with you now versus where you'd rather be. And if you'd And if you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you. It will help other people find the help they need too. I'm Dawn Zicker, the rebuilding coach, and this is Love After Divorce.